Konnichiwa, everyone, and welcome to part 9 of What If Naruto at Kubikiribocho. Well, the last upload was a test to see how well my ability to add in music worked, so hopefully that worked. Hopefully the audio was alright. Anyway, in here, well, let's see what happens, shall we? You know the drill. Smash the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Leave a big ol' like on today's video to help with my ongoing battle against the algorithm. And leave a comment down below. In the meantime, let's jump right into this fanfiction reading. Chapter 9. Chunin Exams Finals. Show up or get shut down. Steel gray eyes looked down from the Kage's viewing box as their owner, Hiruzen Sarutobi, watched as one of his subordinates exited the arena after winning his first match. Tipping his hat in an effort to hide his proud smile, the Sandaime Hokage couldn't help be wowed by the amount of progress his favorite blonde knucklehead had made in the months since graduating the academy. That boy just might very well take this hat from me after all, the elderly shinobi thought. From the first time he heard the boy declare his intentions to become the next Hokage, Sarutobi could honestly say that he wasn't very impressed. The old man could see the blonde's reasons at the time were purely selfish, and had they still been by the time Naruto's order to be considered, then the reinstated Fire Shadow would have denied him the opportunity. But then that escort mission to Wave happened, and everything changed. Hiruzen had seen it right away. Something in Naruto's eyes had been different the day Squad 7 reported on their mission's success. The elderly Hokage saw a more mature light and a sense of understanding that hadn't been there when the boy had left, both of which had only intensified the next time he'd seen him before the preliminaries, and he watched Naruto take a life. Seeing the way Naruto seemed to just shrug off Enin the Oto Genin's bloody death had frightened the elderly genius. But after he was taken on by Anko, and she assured him that the blonde's mental state was healthy, Hiruzen let out the breath he'd been holding. Naruto was not becoming another Orochimaru. No, if anything, I could see bits of his mother in there. It seems, like her, he has begun to master the mentality of what it means to be a ninja, while understanding how to keep his emotions intact. And while not a genius like Minato, the boy truly does have that same raw potential his father was so famous for. Yes, Hiruzen could see, demonstrated clearly from the match he just witnessed, that Naruto Uzumaki had truly become a splendid ninja, as well as a credit to what it meant to be a shinobi. And that was why, when it came time to offer names to be promoted, he would have no doubts when he voiced his backing for the blonde's advancement. The smile on Hiruzen Sarutobi's face is missed by many, but one pair of eyes in particular had caught it immediately. Sitting not 5 feet away was the Kazekage Osuna, or at least someone who everyone believed to be Tsubako no Rasa. In truth, hidden beneath the man's beady eyes was the snake-like gaze of Orochimaru. The former Leaf Shinobi eyed his former teacher with distaste. He had never forgiven the man for choosing Minato to be his successor, rather than himself. And sitting there, watching the way Sarutobi smiled at the blonde down below brought back memories of the day Orochimaru would later learn that Hiruzen mentally chose the next Hokage. It was that same smile. And now, knowing what it meant, seeing it set off a raging storm inside the snake summoner. However, It also piqued the pale rogue ninja's interest, because while he may always despise the Yondaime for stealing the position Orochimaru felt he himself rightfully deserved, let it never be said that the Sannin was unable to appreciate true talent. And from what I can see, the man's serpentine tongue slid over his lips. That boy has truly tremendous talent. Perhaps after the invasion and Konoha's destruction, Orochimaru might even consider keeping the boy to use as the next body after Sasuke. While Tenten was being carted away and her weapons retrieved, Naruto made his way back up into the stands so as to wait for his next match. Upon finding his way to the top step, the blonde wasn't surprised to catch a flying, violet-haired missile in his arms. Oni-san! That was amazing! I knew you would win, but you were great! Naruto chuckled lightly at Izarabi's excited praise. Giving the girl one last squeeze, he pulled back, and taking her scale-covered hand, he began to lead her back to her seat. I'm glad you enjoyed the show, Aiza-chan. Though I wish you hadn't skipped class to come watch me. The girl being admonished turned her bright eyes down bashfully as she replied, I know, big brother. It's just that I haven't been able to see you because of your missions with Uncle-san. And, well, I missed you. Izarabi worried that her Oni-san was going to scold her, and so the little girl couldn't help squeaking in surprise when she instead was hoisted up in his arms and held against his chest. Looking up sharply, the child was again shocked to see that she wasn't in trouble. And I missed you, Naruto Hold on. Naruto reciprocated with a smile. But I told you we would have the next 7 days after this to spend together. I'm not mad. I just don't want you skipping the academy. You never know what's being taught that could very well be important. Understanding the older boy's point, and feeling sorry she had disobeyed her guardian, Izarabi's face fell into a look of true sorrow and regret. The scale-covered swimmer hated disappointing Naruto. You're right, Oni-san. I'm sorry. I promise I won't skip again. Or at least not unless there's an emergency, okay? Deciding he could live with that, the black-clad blonde voiced his agreement. It was by this point that the pair had moved to stand among Naruto's fellow genin. Once inside the gathered circle, he noticed the questioning stares. What? Why are you staring at me? Why are you all staring at me? I'm sorry. It came to no one's surprise that Ino was the first to break out a question. Who is she? And what's with this whole Oni-san business, Naruto? Eyeing his fellow blonde, Naruto decided a partial truth would be more sufficient. Her name is Izarabi. She's an orphan like myself, and I chose to take custody of her while I rescued her from a group of bullies. And her skin? This came from Sakura, who had no knowledge of anyone in Konoha who had any bloodline that even remotely resembled what the young girl seemed to possess. With how big the world is, you can't honestly sit there and tell me that we've really discovered every single Kekkei Genkai, Sakura. And before anyone even thinks to ask, I visit the orphanage often to pass along a percentage of every mission payment I receive to help fund its upkeep. That's how I met Aiza-chan. His logical, albeit snippy, response was enough to quell any more questions about the young girl in the blonde's arms. However, this did not account for the topic of the next question, Naruto's unusual level of skill. That curiosity wasn't answered by Naruto, though. Instead, Anko, who had been standing nearby with her fellow Jonin, snarked her way over and while manhandled the blonde into a headlock, told him that it had been due to her amazing teaching skills. Yep, this little shrimp was only a little garden snake before I came along. Now, though, I've evolved him into a lean, mean, butt-kicking machine. She she laughingly finished off. It was Shikamaru who finally noticed who she was. Hey, wait a minute. Aren't you the woman who proctored the second phase of the exams? What are you doing teaching one of the genin taking it? Ino, who had been upset, while upset she herself hadn't progressed, was still hoping to see both her teammate and, of course, Sasuke advance. So hearing her fellow clan heir's words quickly got a rise from her. Hey, he's right! That should be illegal, and a knucklehead should be disqualified. Surprisingly, it was the two teens' own sensei that shut down their argument. If that were really how it works, then both Sasuke and Shikamaru would need to be cut as well, Ino. They received outside help too. Yeah, the ponytailed blonde voiced earnestly, but neither you nor Kakashi-sensei were proctors in the exam, so it's different. How, Ino? This time it was Naruto who answered. What made my situation different? It's not like there was some way Anko-sensei to give me any real way to cheat today. I could see if maybe it had been Asuma-sensei or Kurenai-sensei who helped me and gave me information about how to beat either Shikamaru or Hinata. But that wasn't the case. So what's the problem? For her part, Ino could only open and close her mouth in an effort to come up with an answer, while her teammate was quick to see the logic in the explanation he'd been handed. Besides, and no offense to you, Anko-sensei, the Tame got personal training from one of our village's most powerful shinobi. If anyone's allowance into the exam should be questioned, it's his. There's no telling just what Kakashi-sensei might have taught him in the last month. And unfortunately, we may not even get to see it, Asuma chimed in again. Because I could see they finished clearing the field for the next match. And if the kid isn't here by the time Hinata and Neji are finished, he'll forfeit his match by default.
Music licensing reimagined.
All eyes widened at this except for two, the Hyuga pair. Neji because he could care less what happened to Sasuke. Hinata because in just a few minutes she'd be facing off against her cousin in front of not only thousands of people, but her father and Naruto as well. Pale lavender orbs stared across the field at a pair of eyes almost identical to themselves. The difference being that the opposite set looked more like rigid cuts of glass than glowing pearls. Hinata held her clenched Taijutsu stance perfectly as she continued her staring contest with Neji. The proctor had signaled the beginning of their match 5 minutes ago, but other than them both settling in, neither Hyuga had physically made a move. Oh sure, Neji had attempted to verbally beat down his opponent. He threw every insult he could get away with at the young girl in an effort to humiliate her into giving up, but quickly brought that to an end when he noticed it wasn't working. So now, both fighters were at a standstill, waiting for the other to make the first move. It was the Hyuga genius who cracked first. Angered by his cousin's defiance, as well as the refusal to submit, Neji shifted his weight before launching forward to engage Hinata in combat. He would show her why it was foolish to believe she stood any chance of defeating him. For Hinata, the look in her cousin's eyes was unsettling. His fury seemed to pulse along the very veins that marked the activation of his Byakugan. But that was nothing compared to the shock that came when it was time to face the older boy's speed. Hinata knew she herself was gifted with an unusual amount of it, but Neji's level of velocity was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Other than the boy Rock Lee, the Hyuga heiress was unaware any genin can move so fast. This caused her to blink, and that caused her to experience a pain unlike any she had ever felt. The sheer force behind Neji's opening palm stroke was earth-shattering. Upon impact, its target, Hinata was sent back, just as Tenten had been in the match before. However, training with her father allowed the young girl to push aside the pain and get her brain to quit rattling fast enough that she managed to recover. Fighting the force of her launch, Hinata worked herself into a series of backflips before gracefully touching down on the tips of her toes and skidding along the arena floor. Taking in deep breaths through her nose, the Hyuga heiress winced from the bruise that quickly formed along her stomach. Thankfully, there had been no chakra behind the thrust, or else Hinata knew the organ hit would have exploded on contact. It seemed, even in his anger, Neji understood the consequences of going too far. And yet, even without the older boy using lethal force, Hinata knew that wouldn't stop her cousin from permanently ending her ninja career through other means. Looking up at the teen in question, Hinata noticed that Neji had dropped from his stance. He stood, hands at his sides with his nose in the air. He was mocking her. The heiress could see it clearly in the older boy's eyes. The Hyuga genius did not consider her a threat. While at the start of the exams, Hinata would have felt shame at this dismissal. Now the girl only felt anger. The feeling bubbled up inside her, hot like a newly active volcano. She had worked hard to reach the finals, nearly died in the process, and yet here was her cousin, acting as if her accomplishments was worth nothing. Hinata's eyes narrowed at the thought. She would just have to show Neji what she had learned outside of training with her father. Bringing her hands together, the Hyuga heiress surprised many in the stands as well as her opponent by winding her fingers through a small chain of hand signs. When she finished, all who watched were surprised when the young girl didn't produce any form of attack. Or at least, not one that they could see. Neji, on the other hand, was more than aware of what his cousin had done. Hinata's palms now arced with sparks of lightning. Clever. Intending to send the joints into my system via our gentle fist. Unfortunately for you, Lady Hinata, you'll soon find out getting within range to perform such a maneuver is impossible. These were the confident thoughts that made their way through Neji's mind as he watched his cousin begin to race towards him. While not on his level, the Hyuga genius did admit that the girl's speed was on par with his own female teammate. However, to Neji, this was the only truly notable skill his cousin owned. Settling into a loose defensive stance, the older boy readied himself to begin dodging Hinata's moves, only to have his eyes widen in astonishment when, instead of continuing her charge, the girl stopped short and leapt into the air, twisting over her stunned-up cousin, before landing and planting her palms firmly on the ground. A second later, the arena echoed with the cries of Neji's pain. Through the screeching of the white electric bolts, Neji heard Hinata call out her attack. Lightning style! Spark trap! The jutsu only lasted all of 5 seconds, but by the time it was over, Neji felt as if he suffered for hours. The fact of the feeling reminded him of the seal upon his forehead only further served to agitate the festering mental and emotional wounds that deep inside scored by events from that night. His body twitching uncontrollably, Neji was unprepared for his cousin when she fell upon him again, this time with swift strokes of their clan's taijutsu, and so he was only able to jerkingly respond. Neji grit his teeth in fury. He was a genius. Fate had chosen him, the gift of strength. And yet here was his pathetic, weak cousin punching him on to the defensive. The boy flexed every muscle he could, and, using his hatred for the girl in front of him to block the pain, now began to deflect her attacks instead of simply dodging. Hinata wasn't distracted by this, though. If anything, she'd expected it. The younger girl knew the vile feelings her once gentle cousin held against her, and their clan's leader, her father. There was no way he was going to make victory easy for her, and would use that hate to keep fighting long after his body wanted to stop. For Hinata, that was fine. She wouldn't give up either. Not now, the heiress thought as she ducked under a 2-finger jab to her shoulder. Not when Naruto-kun and father are both watching me, seeing me. I won't lose here. Upon her using her own feelings to give her strength, Hinata pushed back against her cousin's fierce counterattack. The teen's body may have been damaged from her first attack and his power cut, but the Hyuga male was proven his title is well deserved, as he showed that even at 70%, he was more than capable of keeping up with her. Hinata decided that just meant she'd have to try harder. The girl's next move came in the form of a sweep kick. Dropping low, the Hyuga heiress whipped her leg around in an effort to knock her cousin's feet from under him. Instead of jumping over it, like most, Nettie chose instead to move back. Hinata allowed herself a smile as she finished her rotation, then pushed off with the foot that had stayed planted on the ground. Bursting with speed, the young girl aimed a palm strike at her cousin's chest. When the older boy deflected it, Hinata caught him off guard with a vicious headbutt to the nose. Another shout of pain spewed from Neji's lips, mixing with the blood that flew from his now broken nose. However, this attack used up the last of the boy's patience, and he quickly retaliated with an equally brutal right hook. It was Hinata's turn to cry out in pain, now as her mouth filled with blood from where she chomped down on her own cheek. Neji's flailed counterattack sent the indigo-haired heiress tumbling away, nearly tripping over her own feet. With her head fuzzy, it was only through the activation of her jutsu that Hinata managed to avoid the next attack that soon followed the first. Ducking under the open-handed blow meant for her own nose, Hinata let her left hand fly in an attempt to give her cousin a menacing bruise on his own stomach. When the boy managed to spin away, though, Hinata dropped to all fours so she'd avoid a hit to her blind spot, and threw her legs back to try and take out her cousin's knees. This proved to be a mistake, as almost immediately, Neji revealed his attack to be a feint, as he reached out and took a hold of his cousin's ankle. However, that's not right. Before she could think to free herself, Neji showed his strength by heaving his cousin into the air, and then slamming her back onto the earth. What nobody but Hinata realized was that the boy had actually done so much more than that. Crumpled in the dirt, the Hyuga heiress silently berated herself for falling into such a trap. Because of her short-sightedness, Hinata found herself unable to control her legs. Her cousin had disrupted the chakra flow in her legs. In a fit of desperation and an effort to buy for time, Hinata pulled a handful of shuriken from her hip pouch and sent them whizzing through the air in her approaching opponent's directions. Neji was forced to jump aside due to his close proximity, and so Hinata used that time to push up onto shaky legs. Thankful that it had only been a momentary disruption and that Neji hadn't had time to fully close any of her tenketsu, Hinata took several jumps back so as to widen the distance between herself and the Hyuga genius. But Neji saw this for what it was, and wasn't willing to give the girl even a moment of respite. Using his extreme levels of speed, the older boy, even in his weakened condition, managed to close the gap between himself and his prey with ease, before swiftly laying into her with a fast-paced, gentle fist assault. Hinata did her best to defend while trying not to engage her legs, but found the feat easier said than done. In her mind, her thoughts screamed for her to lash out with kicks and sweeps, but logic forced its way through and told her that doing so would only unbalance her and leave large openings for Neji to actually shut down her chakra. Then she'd really be in trouble. So, with her breath coming in gasps, Hiyashi's daughter weaved and slid her torso around each of her hateful foes' onslaught of jabs and palm strikes. Until, finally, the muscles in her legs jolted and she swung her right leg around in a ferocious roundhouse kick. The speed of the attack, coupled with the surprise factor, allowed Hinata to force Neji into blocking it with his forearms. And while strength wasn't the petite Kunoichi's greatest attribute, The simple fact that her opponent had an expected move afforded Hinata the chance to make Neji stumble. However, instead of pressing her attack, the female Hyuga chose that moment to put distance between herself and her fellow clan member. Up in the stands, many of the spectators were confused by what they'd just seen. Why hadn't Hinata continued her counter-strike? To find the answer, the most observant minds turned to the girl's Jonin instructor. "What kind of technique did you teach her?" Uncle asked with a raised eyebrow. Kurenai merely smiled proudly and gave off an offhanded shrug. "A little of this, a little of that. Maybe a couple of genjutsu for good measure. You know me, Uncle. I like my students to be well-rounded." The special Jonin smirked playfully at her female friend and sucked her teeth. "I think someone's a little too high up on her horse. You don't really think your girl's got a chance to win, do ya? I mean, I heard this Neji kid's pretty good. If she continues like she has, I'd say it's more than a chance." The ruby-eyed beauty countered. Uncle wanted to retort, "She really did," but was interrupted by a chuckle from Asuma. Turning her eyes onto the bearded young Sarutobi, she asked, "What's so funny, Smokey?" "Oh, you'd be laughing too if you'd seen what hand sign she just used. Look." And so she did, and Uncle laughed too. The Land of Fire truly deserved its name. Fire style! Phoenix Flower Jutsu! During her training outside the compound with Kurenai, the very first act of the girl's training had been to learn her elemental affinities. The Genjutsu mistress had stressed that Hinata learn techniques so she could use from a distance. That was a horrible way to say that sentence. Let me try again. The Genjutsu mistress had stressed that Hinata learn techniques she could use from a distance, as there would be times she either wouldn't be able to get up close, like her fight with Zaku, or she needed to keep someone away, like with Neji. When introduced to the chakra paper, both women were surprised to find that, while the Hyuga heiress had the usual connection to fire, she also had one with lightning, a rare occurrence in their homeland. After the first day, Hinata and her Jonin instructor worked to round out the younger girl's rigid training skill set, working to include a handful of lower rank jutsu that required only minimal amounts of chakra, as well as a number of genjutsu that could be performed without straining what reserves she had left. Besides that, the two kunoichi brainstormed ways to combine the techniques into useful strategies, and by the end of the month, both women felt confident in Hinata's ability to defeat her cousin. Watching the fist-sized balls of fire sail through the opponent towards Neji, Hinata hoped she brought a moment to think on what her next move should be. Her mind working fiercely, all the Hyuga girls' thoughts ground to a halt when their Byakugan registered something unbelievable. Neji was performing the Kaiten. Both heiress and clan had to fight their own reactions of dropping their jaws to the floor as they watched a member of the lower house perform such an advanced technique.
Music licensing reimagined.
For Hiyashi, it was like a slap to the face to see someone not of the main branch using the Hyuga's ultimate defense. While for his daughter, it showed that there truly were those within her own family that wished to see her fail, as only a main branch member could have taught Neji that move. By the time her cousin had stopped spinning, Hinata realized her own mistake and once again berated herself for letting Neji get ahead of her. She was supposed to use that time to mold chakra for a genjutsu. Knowing what another jutsu like that would do to her reserves, Hinata decided it was better to work with what she had, and instead be thankful that it had at least drawn out her opponent's trump card, and gotten her back into the position to spring her trap. For Neji, it was like the world's worst insult to his skills that the match had progressed the way it had, and even worse that he had been forced into using his secret weapon so soon. Elder Shu would not be pleased. Staring down his smaller cousin, Neji growled low in his throat, all pretense of being the cool and collected warrior gone. It was time to end the match. Knowing he had more energy left than his cousin, it being the main reason he himself didn't use ninjutsu, Neji decided there was no point in trying to conserve now. Recalling the basic methods of chakra enhancement that came from the tree and water walking exercises, Neji channeled the flow of his own into the muscles of his legs before dropping into a runner's pose, and then shooting forward like a comet. Hinata didn't stand a chance. Before the girl could blink, Neji was on her. In a blurring visage of speed, the Hyuga warrior sent finger jabs and palm strikes into every one of his cousin's loose defensive stance. It was only seconds before he shut down every Tenketsu and left Hinata with nothing. The young Kunichi was made helpless. But Neji didn't stop there. Whenever Hinata attempted any sort of defense, her opponent used that as an excuse to release even more of his inner hatred. If a hand came up, the arm it was attached to was twisted behind her back and quickly broken. Whenever the girl tried to duck or dodge away, the attack was turned into a spot-on feint, and her head was knocked around by a swift follow-up. By the time Neji was through and sent Hinata flying back with a final palm strike, many onlookers feared for the knowing delicate girl's ability to handle such treatment. From her place on the ground, Hinata wheezed out a short, raspy breath as she struggled to lift her battered form. Neji had used more than just the gentle fist. The Hyuga heiress could feel that some of her ribs had indeed been broken by blunt elbow strikes, while her normally cute button nose was now swollen and crooked from being broken. Aside from that and her broken arms that begged to be left alone, Hinata countered that the only real damage was her entire body slowly turning black and blue. And for her, that was good enough. With her dojutsu still active, Hinata could see her bones, could see where and how they'd been broken. So biting down on the shoulder of her heavy jacket, the girl proceeded to shove her bones back into place. Tears welled in her eyes, but the girl refused to let them fall. There would be time for that later. Once it was over though, Hinata went on to do the same thing with her nose. The sharp, gross realignment of bones sending shudders through all the non-shinobi in the arena, knowing there was nothing she could do about her ribs without proper medical jutsu, though. Hinata let herself fall back into her taijutsu stance and stare into the disbelieving eyes of her cousin.
Music licensing reimagined.
I hope that wasn't all you had, Neji, because if it is, I suggest you quit. For the young teen in question, the taunt only made him angrier. Who did this pampered weakling think she was talking to? Flooding his legs with chakra and sending to the bottoms of his feet, Neji prepared to launch into another fearsome display of power, until the ground beneath him exploded. Hinata had quickly brought her hands together and flashed a single seal. Release! To many of the audience, this was confusing, but those who had paid attention during the beginning of the match only smiled as they watched Hinata's plan unfold. Her first jutsu had been a distraction. She laid a high-level explosive tag in the dirt. Now with them back to where they'd started, and Neji having flared his chakra, the seal was charged and had been set off. The result? All eyes watched as the Hyuga genius was literally blown sky high before he came back down for a painful landing. That was pretty impressive. The praise came from Naruto's own mouth as he watched the match below. Izarabi cuddled against his chest. What'd she do? Questioned Sakura. I've never heard of a jutsu like that before. Shikamaru eyed the pinkette from his peripheral vision. Because it wasn't a jutsu, Sakura. You had to set a trap for Neji during the first few minutes of the battle. Something I'm sure she picked up from you, Naruto. And if she did? The blonde in question had a single eyebrow raised, as if to ask, did the move not work? Sighing in resignation, Shikamaru relented and said, what a drag. We don't need two of you running around, Naruto. One knucklehead is enough. I still don't get it, Shika. Ino interrupted the boys. What trap did Hinata set up, and when did she do it? During the time she electrocuted her cousin, Naruto answered for the lazy Nara. Her lightning jutsu was a two-pronged attack. First, it weakened Neji on a physical level, bringing him down enough that Hinata could keep up. And second, she buried an explosive note into the ground that would set off when it interacted with a burst of chakra. Ino and the others who hadn't figured out what had happened couldn't help be amazed. The plan, while ultimately simple, was still brilliant. The explosions wasn't predetermined either, Shino threw in. The Oburame was proud of his teammate and wished to further boast her ingenious plot. Hinata deliberately left the note uncharged because she wanted it to react instantly when hit with chakra, thus allowing for the large explosion. Neji attempted to push an enormous amount of level of power into his lower body, and instead powered the seal under his feet. And now the guy's even more banged up because of it, finished Naruto. Sakura and her blonde teammate understood now what had happened, and could only look on and wonder as they realized the same thing. The winner would be whoever could withstand their injuries the longest. Back in the stadiums, both Hyuga members glared at the other. Neji had managed to summon the strength needed to stand on his shredded, blood-covered legs, while Hinata hunched to alleviate the pain in her broken ribs. Both knew that this was it. Once they started, it would only end with one of them passed out. Once they started, it would only end when one of them was passed out on the ground, or too broken to continue. Neji had the chakra to go on for hours, but his body was thrashed, while Hinata's body was in better shape, but she herself had very little energy left. This is it, they both thought. It all ends here. Pushing off, both Hyuga rushed to engage their opponent. Hinata struck first. The struggling Kunoichi threw a palm strike out in an effort to end the match quickly, but missed her mark when Neji swerved out of the way. Dodging his cousin's attack caused a battered genius, though, and he stumbled, and his quick movement caused Neji to stumble over his own feet. Fighting to stay on his feet, the young shinobi pedaled backwards, giving him the added bonus of putting distance between himself and Hinata. Even with her Byakugan, the Hyuga heiress found that her vision had begun to blur, a sure sign of exhaustion, both of the physical and chakra variety. But refusing to quit, Hinata chose instead to turn her dojutsu off to conserve her rapidly draining energy supply before balling up her small fists and rushing back in to face her opponents, facing her cousin. From there, the battle devolved more into a brawl. Neji still had the energy to put into using his gentle fist, so he opted for it whenever possible, some moves being beyond his current physical condition. The labor genius managed to duck or outstep more than most of Hinata's flailing fists, but found himself hard-pressed to mount any real offense. And yet, it seemed, in the end, that such a thing would not be needed. Hinata tried. The girl gave everything she had left to throw in a last-ditch effort to slug her cousin in the face, only to overreach and stumble as she lost her center. With no energy to catch herself and gravity working against her, the young heiress dropped like a puppet without strings, clattering to the ground in a beaten heap. Hinata choked on dust as she gasped for air. Standing over her, Neji looked down at his defeated cousin with contempt. For all that fire you had in your eyes and all your training, you continued to forget that our battle was already predetermined. Fate had long ago decided that I would be victorious today, while you, cousin, would fall in defeat. You lose. Hinata wanted to fight, wanted to stand up and prove that Neji's words weren't true, but she just didn't have the strength. Her body ached as if she'd been beaten by a bat, and her eyelids hung heavy as the girl fought to even stay conscious. It broke the young heiress's heart, but there was no denying it. She'd lost. And even with the knowledge that her father and the one she loved could see it, The simple fact that she failed in front of those Zoro eyes made Hinata Hyuga cry. Neji's eyes watched for a moment as Medic Ninja hauled his battered cousin away on a gurney. He looked on for a few seconds before turning his gaze upwards towards the stands, finding his target. The Hyuga male locked eyes with an older, sharper pair of lavender orbs. Hiyashi Hyuga was looking down at him with a blank stare. And yet, for all the stern and steel the Hyuga patriarch possessed, Neji was able to see the signs that told him there would be terrible punishment awaiting him at home. Years of living under the same roof with another person did wonders for one's power of observation, especially when you had to actively search for emotional tells. But despite knowing these things, the thrashed young man felt no fear, as he finally broke eye contact with his uncle. Genma shooed him away to clear the field for the next match. No, instead the prodigious warrior found that his mind was instead centered on the older man's daughter. Or more specifically, the loss he'd almost suffered at her hands. Because while it'd be nice to say that he had everything under control, and that everything that went on had all been part of a predestined cat and mouse game that fated Neji as the winner, a small part of Neji found itself doubting such a belief. And how could it not when, for a moment, no matter how short it was, Neji Hyuga truly felt as if he might lose. But then, that couldn't be true, could it? He, Neji Hyuga, prodigy and genius of the Hyuga clan, could never be defeated by a self-pitying heiress, could he? Naruto watched as Squad 8's Jonin instructor hurriedly exited the stands with Shino following close behind. Seeing this made the blonde smile with the knowledge that Hinata had people who cared about her well-being. Especially when he could see from the corner of his eyes that none of the Hyuga sitting in their special box so much as twitched while watching their clan member get wheeled away. However, thinking of Shino's departure made Naruto voice a question asking about Kiba's whereabouts. I couldn't tell you, Choji answered. He usually joins me and Shika for lunch when we're all still in the village. But after what happened with Akamaru, neither of us had seen him. This was the response he'd gotten from the other genin that surrounded him as well. And that fact worried him. Naruto could easily recall the unbridled animalistic rage that Kiba had fallen into after his partner's death. And he could only hope that wherever the Inuzuka was, he wasn't thinking of doing anything drastic. The blonde's thoughts were halted though when Rock Lee, who was just now hobbling up the steps, voiced a question of his own. Since it seems the topic of discussion is wayward teammates... Hold on. Since it seems the topic of discussion is wayward teammates, I must ask you, Naruto-sen, where is yours? Drawing attention to the Uchiha's absence made Naruto realize that 2 of the first round matches had come and gone, meaning Sasuke's was next. Turning his eyes on the crutch-bearing taijutsu user, the black-clad blonde answered that he didn't know. The TEM took off with Kakashi-sensei almost immediately after the preliminary rounds, stopping only for a minute to get checked over by a nurse. After that, I have no clue what happened to him. Here, Naruto let his eyes drift over to Sakura. One thing I'm sure of, though, is if he's not here soon, he'll be disqualified. Not surprisingly, it was Ino who spoke up in the boy's defense. They want to do that! She barked. Who do you think all these people came to see? Certainly not Shikamaru or those lunatics from Sana. I'd be careful who you call a loser, little girl. Especially when you yourself didn't even make it to the finals. The voice belonged to Tamari, eldest of the Suna siblings. The fan-wielding beauty sent a sneer at her fellow blonde's direction for continuing. And besides, it's like I told you girls before. Just because his last name is famous or his eyes see better than others doesn't make him any more important than a streak over here. All eyes turned in the direction Tamari had pointed her thumb, and were surprised at finding it jabbed in Naruto's direction. Naruto himself asked the question that was on their minds. The streak? Frost green eyes crinkled at their owner gave a Frost green eyes crinkled as their owner gave a playful smirk. Tamari placed a hand on her crooked hip and replied, or cocked hip, and replied, "That's what Baki, my jonin instructor, was calling to my father when he arrived last night. It seems your speed impressed him." "Oh?" Naruto raised a single eyebrow in response. "And what exactly do you think about the name?" "Tamari." The sandy blonde finished the lead Naruto had left. "And I'm curious to know what your business is. What business it is of yours, what I think about it." A playful smirk slid its way onto Naruto's face. "I only ask for you to have heard the name would need to eavesdrop on that particular conversation. Which begs the question, what about me is so interesting to you?" Many eyes watched the battle of words, but few could believe that they were seeing what they were seeing. For those who knew and had spent time with Naruto found it hard to accept, while those who had only heard of him watched in fascination. Naruto Uzumaki looked like he was flirting, and from the pink glow that now highlighted Subaku no Tamari's tan cheeks, it seemed he was succeeding. However, Tamari will not be unbalanced so easily. Taking a few steps forward in an effort to use her superior height to rack the boy's nerves, she answered, "Well, how else was I going to know if you were really worth my time?" Teal met blue as neither Naruto nor Tamari let themselves back down. For the Leaf Shinobi, it was a matter of fun. He never had such an experience before, and was doing something to his pulse that he liked. For the San Kunoichi, it was a test, to see if the boy in front of her could be what she was looking for, as none of the ones at home piqued her interest. Neither one would let themselves back down, but someone else had another idea. "Hey, don't give my big brother that look, lady. He'll knock you into next week if you even think about fighting him." Izurabi's shout at such close range jolted both blondes from their staring contest. Tamari leaned back, blinking when she realized just how close she'd gotten before looking down at her nose at the little girl she'd finally noticed was in Naruto's arms. "Big brother? Fight him? Oh, you don't have to worry about that, kid. I don't know if even in me to mar your only son's handsome face." Laughter rumbled in Naruto's chest as he watched Aiza-chan stick her tongue out in response to that remark. But then the sandy blonde's words worked their way to his brain, and the sword-wielding Uzumaki let another grin find its way to his face. "Just as your big brother doesn't think he'd be capable of ruining such a beautiful desert flower with such a barbaric activity, Aiza-chan." Then turning his attention back to the older girl in front of him, Naruto went on to say, "But I would like to get to know that flower a little better, if she's interested." Every pair of eyes that was watching nearly shot from their sockets. Had they really just seen that? Naruto Uzumaki, resident head of Sakura Haruno's fan club for the last 4 years, and just asked another girl on a date? There was only one thing any of them were thinking at that moment. It was a good thing Hinata wasn't there to see it. On her end, Tamari was caught a little off guard. In truth, she hadn't expected the boy to push so far this fast. Because, while the San Kunoichi knew she'd like to at least go on a date with him, the sandy blonde also understood that wasn't a real possibility. Because any minute now, her father would give the signal, and Tamari would become part of an invasion force designed to destroy Konoha. A force that could very well kill the boy in front of her. And yet, despite this, Tamari found her lips moving before she could stop herself. "I'd like that, Naruto-kun." The crowd is getting restless, thought Sarutobi. The elderly Hokage looked over the thousands of faces that filled his village's stadium and could clearly see, despite his age, that each and every one of them was upset. As well they should be, though, since the last time they'd seen anything exciting was 10 minutes ago. Neji and Hinata's match had been well and over with, and since there was nothing to clean up, Genwa announced the next match immediately after both fighters had left the arena. It was understandable, even more so when one considered the amazing battles that had just taken place, and the hype that had been whispered among the strength of Sasuke Uchiha. So, when the young man in question's match arrived, and he was nowhere to be found, many onlookers quickly became unsettled. It had been 10 minutes since the match was called. Where was Sasuke?
Music licensing reimagined.
Hiruzen Sarutobi sighed in exasperation. He was afraid this would happen. Kakashi allowed his tardiness to rear its head at the worst possible time. And in doing so, now put the Sandaime in a terrible position. He would have to disqualify the Uchiha heir. The Kazekage had spoken up within the first few minutes of the wait. When Hiruzen was originally going to voice his decision and convince his village leader to starve off such a declaration more minutes. Look at all those people out there, Sarutobi. Think of how far they've traveled, and all for the chance to see young Sasuke in action against my son. Why deprive them of that?
Music licensing reimagined.
At first, the Sarutobi clan's leader was in a begrudging agreement. He had numerous Anbu relay the various whispers of excitement around the village, all centered on Sasuke. And it had been that memory that kept the old man from dismissing his fellow Kage's pleas. But this was just ridiculous. After all, what kind of message did this send to prospective clients? Who would hire Leaf Shinobi if they had to worry about their help arriving too late? The village could not afford such a reputation, especially with their daimyo present. No, there was only one thing to do. Sakura Haruno couldn't believe her ears. Sasuke was disqualified? There was no way. It had to be a mistake. A Hokage really wouldn't do that, would he? Not after everything Sasuke went through, and all the training he no doubt underwent in order to prepare for this day. Sasuke couldn't be disqualified. He just couldn't. And yet, as she listened to the proctor down below call for the next two participants, the Pinkette was numbly forced to face the truth. Her Sasuke-kun had been cut from the tournament. Why did he do that? Why did the Hokage disqualify Sasuke-kun, you guys? Looking around, Sakura could see that, while Ino was in a similar state of shock, the rest of the rookies just stood around her, just seemed to shrug off the fact that one of their own had been deprived the chance to obtain the rank of Chunin. Even Naruto remained silent. And that angered her. Eyebrows knitted together, Sakura jumped from her seat and swiftly stepped in front of her blonde teammate, with arms flinging as she asked why he wasn't upset like her. Because the Hokage made the right decision, Sakura. Everyone hold on. That's Lee speaking. Because the Hokage made the right decision, Sakura. Everyone, including Naruto, knows that. The answer came from Lee. The boy with the large eyebrows hobbled over on his crutches, body still tender from opening so many gates, and further explaining why her raven-haired love interest had been let go.
Music licensing.
For the Hokage to wait any longer, and even then wait beyond perhaps a minute, could be seen as favoritism. This is something a Kage cannot allow. To do so would damage not only his or her village own reputation, but also the villages as a whole. Oh wait, shit! That was when it looked like Sakura was going to argue with you. It was Asuma that spoke up next. The Jonin present all having listened. As troublesome as you may find it, Sakura, Lee is right. And it's not only the dangers of favoritism that Lord Hokage has to worry about, there's also the business aspect as well. What client is going to send missions to a village that they think won't respond to them in a swift fashion? Just like Lee just said, already waiting longer than a minute was bad enough, but 10? This tournament has been marked on people's calendars for weeks, Sakura. Naruto finally chimed in. However, as he answered, his eyes were on the arena, watching Shikamaru attempt to defeat Temari. With that being the case, and everybody knowing the time it started, what excuse could Sasuke possibly give for not being here? If this had been a mission, like the one we took months ago to Wave, I don't think the people needing Sasuke's help would be satisfied with, "Sorry, I got lost on the road to life." But Sasuke-kun is... Sakura tried to defend her other male teammate, only to be cut off by a cold, sharp voice. "A coward." Gaara's presence sent chills down the spines of many who saw him. Naruto was forced to tighten his hold on Izarabi as she curled closer to him in fear. Ino, who had the unfortunate pleasure of still being seated, found herself less than 2 feet away from the frightening redhead. The platinum blonde could feel her palms sweat and her legs turned chilly as she croaked out, "How can you say that?" Ino thanked every god she knew when Gaara answered her without looking in her direction. "Because that is what he is. The Uchiha knew I was the one to be his opponent today, and so he refused to show up. That makes him a coward, and not worth my time." The chill that frosted over Gaara's words kept even Sakura's usual defensive rant silent. Sea green eyes blinked once before turning to look at Naruto. Gaara's posture straightened just so. His shoulders shifted before he missed at the blonde. "But you, Naruto Uzumaki, I could feel the power that leaks free. Killing you is sure to prove my existence." It seemed that was all the redhead wanted to say, because almost immediately after Gaara turned and walked away. Yet, even with his departure, all those he left behind could still feel the goosebumps raised against their skin. There was something not right about Subaku no Gaara. Izarabi shook in fright. The boy with the gourd terrified her. Instinct dedicated, she found comfort in who she saw as the strongest. Turning her teary eyes upward, the trembling academy student whimpered to draw her big brother's attention. With those caring blue eyes on her, Izarabi managed to squeak out, "Oni-sen, you'll beat him, right? You won't leave me alone, will you?" Naruto immediately set to comforting the little child in his arms, holding her as close as possible. The blonde ducked Izarabi's head under his chin, before he slowly started to rock her. "Of course I'll beat him, Aiza-chan. I promised you I'd never let you feel that loneliness again. And you know your Oni-san never goes back on his words." "Let's just hope this time you haven't bitten off more than you could chew." The voice is one that Naruto hadn't expected to hear. Turning his eyes, keeping his head still, the blonde locked into a stare with Shikamaru. Looking over this vetal older boy, Naruto saw that the Nara air was covered in scrapes, while his overshirt had been lost in his match with Temari. Finishing the signs of battle off was a healthy cost of dust and dirt. "So," the cloak getting rolled out, "you gave up, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. Naruto knew Shikamaru wasn't interested in winning. The tournament. So when the pineapple-headed shinobi shrugged, the blonde couldn't help scoffing out her laugh. "Which means you're up next," Sakura lightened up. the pink cat had recovered from the previous encounter with Gaara and was eager to get her mind focused on something else. And with how battered Neji is from his fight with Hinata, there's no way you'll lose. And he didn't, because Neji wound up forfeiting. This surprised all who knew the cocky Hyuga. But what they didn't know was that Neji had used the whole of Shikamaru's match with Tamara to think on how to handle Naruto. Neji's cold, calculating eyes had kept the blonde in their sights, and took in how the cloak getting stood. What the older boy found cemented his decision.
Artlist.io.
As a member of the Hyuga clan, Neji had an innate ability to read the body language of any one individual. It was with this power of observation that let Neji know Naruto had yet to use even half of his strength. The blonde wasn't even breathing hard. After witnessing the amount of skill the younger gaining possessed without being pushed, Neji was able to come to a rough estimate of Naruto Uzumaki's true strength. One-on-one, both at 100%, Neji believed he had a chance to win. But as it stood, with him standing on tattered legs and a debilitating concussion, the Hyuga genius knew he had no choice.
Artlist.io.
Proctor, he caught up from his place in distance. I choose to forfeit. Far better to concede looking smart than lose at a humiliating beatdown. A treading thought, it seems, because Tamara was quick to voice her own removal from the tournament after that, her opponent having beaten her younger brother. All eyes popped when they realized what this meant. Naruto is now left to face Gaara. I anticipated this end, Naruto thought begrudgingly. I just didn't expect it to be so soon. Apparently this was the right move for the crowd, because when the blonde kissed her cheek and set down his arabi and started to descend the stairs, he was found by thunderous applause. The whole time Naruto kept his eyes locked on Gaara, who had sunshined into the field via a whirlwind of sand. Moving to the center of the battleground, Naruto stood, only a handful of feet away from someone he knew would kill him if given the chance.
Music licensing reimagined.
There would be no warm-up. There would be no breaks. Naruto steeled his nerves before nodding to Gamma that he was ready. Then let the final match of the Chunin exams begin! Before the special Jonin could move out of the way, though, two things happened. First, Naruto beat the man to the punch and shot back 5 yards. Second, Kakashi and the missing Sasuke appeared in a whirlwind of leaves. The entire stadium had been supercharged by the explosive way Naruto had reacted, moving faster than a veteran shinobi, so when their exciting spectacle was ground to a halt, many of them took to voicing their displeasure. Something that came as a surprise to an incredulous-looking Kakashi and Sasuke. Hey, get out of the way! We want to see some action! Get off the field! You had your chance, kid! Now move! But what really shook the pair was when a female voice, one that Ino and Sakura recognized as Amy, shouted, Your own news, Uchiha! Now you and the Scarecrow get your butts out the field so Naruto can cream this guy!
Artlist.io.
For those that knew the girl couldn't believe their ears. She had been one of Sasuke's biggest followers back in the academy, vehemently defending the Uchiha's name against every type of slander. So for the Kunoichi washout to now dismiss Sasuke with that same enthusiasm while simultaneously uplifting Naruto caused many of their jaws to drop. When Kakashi finally managed to snap himself out of his stupor, the elite Jonin turned his lone eye up in the direction of the Kage box. With a look of confusion, he asked, Hokage-sama, what's going on? I thought Gaara was to be Sasuke's opponent. He was, Genma answered for the elderly shinobi. But when your student wasn't present at the time of his match, Lord Hokage had him disqualified. Hearing this got a look of disbelief from the Uchiha in question. That look soon morphed into a scowl as he eyed his Jonin instructor. You said they would push my match back if I wasn't on time, Kakashi. It's the only reason I let you talk me into resting after our spar. I assumed they would, Sasuke, was the man's muttered reply. We will be speaking in my office once the exams are over, you two. The Sandaime called down from his seat. This behavior is unacceptable, and I won't have it repeated. But for now, you'll need to remove yourself from the field, as Naruto and the Kazekage's son are due to round out the tournament. With the dismissal of the Hokage, both Kakashi and an irate Sasuke began to walk towards the staircase. The Uchiha heir desperately wanted to argue, but knew better than to do so in front of so many people. Making demands, out loud or even veiled, would not be tolerated by any shinobi, no matter what name they carried. Once the two made their exit, Genma signaled for the match to resume. Up in his seat, Orochimaru was not a happy man. After that fool Kakashi sealed the curse mark he placed on Sasuke, the Sannin was eager to see how well the boy fared without the added power. He'd seen it before, back during the preliminary rounds, and could barely contain himself at such a delicious outcome. The inverted Sharingan. Never in his wildest dreams had Orochimaru expected his personal steel to be able to amplify the already tumultuous power of the Uchiha clan's bloodline. Watching the power explode from Sasuke sent shivers down his spine, with the curse mark's power being rooted in the boy's eyes. There was none of the messy chakra explosion that accompanied its use by the Sound of War. No. In fact, Orochimaru watched as even his old sensei had been unable to detect the vile ink that coursed through the last Uchiha's veins when he faced the Inuzuka boy. But the Snake Sannin knew, and it pleased him greatly. Enough that he didn't even worry about Kakashi's laughable attempts to interfere with his plan. Since then, Orochimaru imagined what sort of explosion would occur when Sasuke willingly chose to activate his now repressed seal. The rogue ninja could see it in his mind's eye, how the raw, unrestrained power would visibly flare from Sasuke's Sharingan, and licked his lips in pure hunger at just how it would feel to bear witness to the Uchiha's further descent into darkness. It was why he had so eagerly desired the chance for the Jinchuriki of Suna to be the boy's opponent, so as to force Sasuke to use his power. But now it seems Orochimaru would have to wait. And even with the invasion set to begin soon, needed only word from his summon team from beyond the walls, Orochimaru was not a patient man. He hated waiting. Anger was the minority emotion at the moment, as aside from the disguised Orochimaru, the only other person feeling it was Sasuke. The young clan heir strode over to his fellow Genin with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. There was no denying where the boy would rather be at the moment. As it was, he and his instructor got closer that Sakura decided she would be the first to greet him, or rather, to chastise Kakashi for his foolishness. Kakashi-sensei, what in the world were you thinking? What made you believe that letting Sasuke couldn't be late was okay? Asuma followed the girl's lead. Your student beat me to it, but I'm curious myself, Kakashi. Did you really think Dad was just going to let the kid slide? Scratching his neck in embarrassment, the Jonin in question gave a response. Honestly, yes. I figured with everything I was hearing around the village that everyone wanted to watch Sasuke showcase his abilities, and to me that just translated to them willing to wait until he was ready to fight. But they weren't! But they weren't, Sasuke growled, and now I've lost my chance to become a Chunin. In an attempt to settle or crush his obviously boiling temper, Sakura got up from her seat, walking over to him and softly placed her hand on his shoulder. It'll be alright, Sasuke-kun. This isn't the only way to be promoted. You'll still have your chance. What are you talking about, Sakura? What other way is there besides the exams? Smiling softly at the raven-haired boy's confusion, Sakura offered a reply. It's something called an in-field promotion. Genin can be promoted to Chunin through their performances on a mission. The same thing can be done to become a Jonin, but that usually only happens during times of war. And just how do you know about this? Lucia's question came in with an eyebrow of disbelief. Sakura dropped her hand from its perch and looked down sheepishly. Well, I know I didn't do so well in the exams, and I was worried about being stuck as a genin until next year. So I did some research during the month you and Naruto were training. With a sense of hope welling in his stomach, Sasuke turned and looked at the Jonin present and asked if what Sakura said was true. More or less, answered Asuma. Besides, most villages' ranks are swelled with Chunin. If the only way to be promoted was through some series of biannual tests, we'll be stuck with hundreds of genin. Our ranks are filled with Chunin? Ino questioned from her seat. Duh, Ino, Shikamaru told her. What, did you think everyone wailing around... What, did you think everyone wailing around with a flak jacket was a Jonin? The platinum blonde's eyes blazed with a feminine fury. And what if I did, you lazy buffoon? Then it means our academy needs a reboot, snorted Anko as she entered the conversation. Beside her, both Kurenai and Shino walked onto the scene. The trio had gone to check on Hinata after her defeat at Neji's hands. Anko, leaving later to support her friend. After learning from the medics that the Hyuga heiress's condition was not life-threatening, they made their way back up to the stands and walked in on the current conversation. For the past few years, each major ninja village had been made up of roughly 1,500 to 2,000 shinobi. Konoha holding the largest at 2,500, and Suna the lowest at a little less than 1,000. Of those numbers, only a small handful were Jonin. The reason being because of the immense level of skill and sheer power required, as well as leadership capability. The rest of the force is made up primarily of Chunin, and the last percentage being Genin. What about the Hanbu? This question came from Sakura. Kakashi took over from Anko at this point. The Hanbu make up a very small number of ninja inside the village. Their own numbers not usually exceeded 2 handfuls, or roughly 20 shinobi. However, these men and women are not counted among the roster, as it is based on wartime account. The Anbu are never put on the front lines. How come? Ino asked. If the Anbu are meant to be the most skilled ninja in the village, under its Kage, why wouldn't they be used in war? Kurenai shook her head as she picked up the lesson. It's not that they are never used, Ino. Just the opposite, actually. Anbu are used heavily in times of war. The difference between them and us being their assignments. Their assignments are restricted to assassination and sabotage. Very rarely would you see Anbu in open combat, as their skills are needed for more pressing missions. The Genin all listened in rapt attention, at least until Anko's loud voice drew them away. How come nobody came up and told me what... How come nobody came and told me my kid was up next? And he's going up against that freaky sand kid? This is going to be great! The woman's excitement seemed to leak from her every pore as she leaned over the railing for a better look at the battlefield. Her eager exclamation snapped the rest of the group back into real time, as they all remembered that there was still one more match to watch. Down below, Naruto eyed his opponent warily. The redhead hadn't moved a muscle since the start of the match, where Naruto himself had settled into a strong defensive stance. Forgoing his heavy zanpakuto at the moment, the blonde instead tried to come up with a way to get past the shield of sand he knew would spring up if he got too close. Well, there is one thing I could try, Naruto thought before he brought forth his hands to forge a hand sign, only to stop so he could catch the cork that rocketed towards his face. Azura's eyes watched as sand slowly snarked its way out of the gourd on Gaara's back. The earthly particles rose into the air and formed a cloud, before a volley of sand needles burst forth and raced through the air, their target being Naruto. The blonde swordsman jumped in to the side so as to avoid being skewered, all the while keeping his eyes on his opponent. This proved to be the right move, because as soon as his feet had left the ground, a fist of earth burst out of the ground and tried to smash the cloaked Genin. Nimbly, Naruto twisted around the oncoming attack and sent a hail of shuriken that he pulled from his pocket and pulled from his pouch at Gaara. Predictably, every one of the following stars was halted by a wall of sand, but this is what Naruto had wanted. When raised in defense, Gaara's sand blocked his view of whatever was in front of him. Using this to his advantage, Naruto quickly summoned the necessary chakra and then seemed to simply vanish. He used the hidden chameleon jutsu that Anko had shown him during their first mission together. Once that was done, he molded his chakra and began to summon his mist. This match wasn't a game, and Naruto knew he needed to end it as quickly as possible. Gaara's normally impassive facade crinkled into a look of annoyance when his sand dropped to the floor, and he was met with a strange but an interesting sight. Naruto Uzumaki was gone. The redhead could find no trace of his fellow Genin, and to top it off, a heavy mist was settling onto the field. Just as Gaara thought about how interesting his new prey was, his sea-green eyes widened a fraction in surprise when the barest traces of heat washed over his back. His hand had just stopped a fireball from scorching him. Turning his head in the slightest, the Kazekage's son looked again for his blonde foe. The mist had stopped growing, leaving just enough visibility to see a few feet ahead. Naruto was not in range of Gaara's sight. A shadow had Gaara's eyes snap into the corners of their sockets. From his peripheral vision, the Suna native caught just a glimpse of something moving through the fog, its speed removing it from sight just as quickly as it came. The redhead still sent a powerful blast of sand barreling forward, though, the pillar of sand crushing harmlessly into the earth. Gaara knit his brow together in the barest hint of frustration. His mother wanted blood, but his prey was choosing to hide instead of face him. And that's when he heard Naruto's voice. "Oh, you were so close, Gaara. I think a few bits landed on my coat." Naruto's voice seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, echoing without a specific point of origin. The redhead listened as his mother growled in vexation. The taunting tone Naruto's used, causing the sand at Gaara's feet to jump in agitation. Subaku no Gaara had never been taunted before, but he was quickly learning that it was not something he did. Something he did not like. Sand suddenly jumped up on the red-headed Genin's side and had him turning to see what had tried to strike him, only to whip his head around when another blow was walled off. Deciding to take the initiative, Gaara decided to thrust his hand out, pouring his will into the sand and adding to its power, and then shooting spears of sand from the defensive wall in an attempt to catch the blonde he believed to be there. When that failed, Gaara finally noticed just how close the attacks were getting before being stopped. His hand was only just able to catch them. This revelation caused his mother's hackles to rise. Who did this worm think they were? Did he not understand who he was dealing with? Well, they would just have to show him, wouldn't they? Sand swiftly pooled under Gaara's feet before solidified and then took to the air. Naruto's brow was furrowed, though. Naruto's brow was furrowed in thought as he pondered what to do next. His summons had informed him that the Kazekage's son had taken to the air, effectively cutting them off, which meant that it was now in the blonde's hands. He used the same trio from his match with Tenten, using them in another effort to gauge his opponent's strength, or rather to discern the capabilities of that sand for himself. And Naruto didn't like what he'd learned. Add to the fact that his opponent was in the air, Naruto had to wonder if his mist was useless now. Unless... Naruto's scrunched eyebrows jumped to his hairline. That could work. His mind racing. The blonde Genin thought back to the first exam. Ice mirrors! It was risky, and Naruto doubted he had the skill with elemental combinations to make them as big as Haku's. But the plan was the best he could think of without taking down his mist. Maybe if I make enough, it'll make up for their small size. Unfortunately, the blonde didn't get the chance to set his plan into motion, because he was soon having to avoid being crushed by a dangerous fist of sand. Jumping back, Naruto outwardly cursed while internally wondering how Gaara had managed to find him. The answer was not one he'd expected. A floating eyeball. It was the same technique that Uzumaki recalled his adversary using during the written exam. The eye's power quickly became apparent when Naruto found himself leaping and twisting through the air to avoid being caught by Gaara's sand. It was clear that, no matter where the redhead was, he could see Naruto and direct his attacks accordingly. This was a problem. Deciding his tactics weren't working like he'd hoped, Naruto set to work canceling his mist and returning the steam to normal. But the blonde made sure to activate his stealth jutsu before he was fully exposed. Once this stage was clear again, the invisible Naruto could easily find the floating Gaara, the redhead kneeling on a cloud of sand. Blue Eyes watched as the airborne Genin used his floating eye as well as his single open eye to try and pinpoint his location. In fact, it almost looked as if Gaara could sense him. Knowing that, if such a thing were true, he would lose his element of surprise. Naruto opted instead to give his opponent a different target. Using an old trick, the blonde's hands formed a cross seal, and, out of a cloud of smoke, came a shadow clone. The plan worked. Immediately upon the copy's creation, Gaara's attention turned in its direction, as Gaara hurled a twin strike of sand spears at his clone. Naruto took that moment to move away, watching as his original clone created two of his own. Naruto thought of how best to handle Gaara and his sentient sand. With his speed, the blonde was sure he would close the gap fast enough to land blows. But the worry came in being able to pull away from getting captured afterwards. Which meant separating the redhead from his gourd was the first priority. This came easy enough thanks to the young Genin's invisibility. Making his way around the floating Gaara, Naruto silently pulled a kunai from his thigh hoister and then dashing towards his opponent. Leaping into the air, the cloaked blonde reached out and took hold of the gourd strap while simultaneously moving his knife through his shoulder. The leather strap gave out under the sharp blade, and Naruto soon found himself falling to the arena floor, where he proceeded to launch the container across the field. Blue Eyes watched as one of the clones raced after it and engulfed the deadly sand in a large ball of fire. Now the only sand Gaara had was what the redhead used to keep him afloat. Unfortunately, the calm Naruto felt was quickly wiped away when he watched his opponent work through a chain of hand sands. Earth style, Earth flow river. The now visible Naruto watched as his clones were both caught in two separate upsurging pools of mud. The brown sludge quickly swallowed the copies up before they could react, and they dispersed in clouds of smoke. But Gaara wasn't done. Style, Earth Dragon Bullet! It was the maw of a dragon, dredging up from within the two pools of pre-prepared mud. Naruto sensed trouble, and was proven right when both dragons' heads opened their jaws and began sending volleys of compacted mud on him. At him.
Artlist.io.
Using his great speed, though, Naruto was able to duck and dodge each of the bullets that threatened to shatter his bones. Moving around the field, the black-clad swordsman took a chance and jumped into the air, skimming by another hail of rocketing projectiles. Naruto swiftly flashed through his own set of hand signs before calling out his jutsu. Water style! Exploding water shockwave! A stone-cutting pressurized jet of water flew from Naruto's lips. The bone-breaking blast was aimed straight at Gaara, but before it could hit, the red-headed Genin swerved out of the way. Making a choice to not let his attack go to waste, Naruto turned the jutsu on both dragons' heads that had been left waiting for Gaara to return to his attention.
Artlist.io.
With the lack of constant chakra flow, the technique's elemental advantage wasn't strong enough, and soon both mud dragons were shattered and mixed into the deluge that formed after Naruto ceased his own chakra flow. The puddle of water left behind wasn't really enough to make a dragon of its own, but the blonde creator of the pool did decide that it could be used for a different technique. Now it was just a matter of timing his jutsu right. Letting Gaara chase him around with his next Earth-style jutsu, the same dragons he used against Lee, Naruto hopped, flipped, and dodged to avoid being snagged or slammed by his opponent's impressive display of powerful techniques. It was as he backflipped away from one particular serpent, letting it smash back into the earth it was made of, that the blonde saw his chance. Wind style! Great break! Woo 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 woo.
Music licensing reimagined.
Naruto's plan was cut short when an alarm every citizen of Konoha knew well blared across the air. A loud explosion and the frightened screams of people outside was all it took for the shinobi in the stands to realize what they were hearing was no mistake. Konoha was under attack. And so with that comes an end to part 9 of What If Naruto had Kubikiribocho. Honestly, this is a pretty interesting chapter. I mean, yes, it did have Hinata get her ass basically beat the foot. I mean, yes, Hinata did get beat up by Neji, but it was by no means one-sided. It was a pretty fun fight to read. I'll admit that. And then we have Sasuke, the arrogant bastard that he is, getting kicked to the curb like the piece of trash he is. Please note, I do not hate Sasuke. It's just that this Sasuke is very detestable. Plus he killed Akamaru. I cannot forgive that. Plus I always like reading Sasuke being put in his place when he's being an arrogant prick. Also, as I'm sure you have noticed, I have started adding music to my videos. I am learning. I do not know how well I am doing, but I hope that it does well. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As I said before, hit that subscribe bar, turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Hit that like button, and leave a comment down below. I'll accept any request of stories to read in the future. And we are currently at 69 subscribers. Alright. But anyway, if we get to 100 subscribers, we will do the 100 subscribers special. And it will be one hell of a movie. Yes, movie. I am going to hate myself for a long time recording that. So if you really want to torture me, yay! Alright, all joking aside, it's been a pleasure being here. I'll see you all in the next one. Chaos Control!